All right. Hello, Court. Welcome to Queerly Beloved. Great to see you.
Great to see you too. Thanks for having me. Glad we could make it work.
Yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation. So, as I mentioned just before we jumped on, the first question I love to ask my guests is tell me who you are, but do so by describing the perfect drag avatar that embodies that. And yeah, I love that you're closing your eyes. Yeah, go in a little bit and think about who you are in this moment in your life, in this moment on this day.
I feel like I am a kitten that like turns into a
Mm.
vicious dragon. Yeah, it's like one of
Wow.
those like you pet it and then it just bites you. That's what I feel right now. It's like
Where
so
do you think
cute.
that cute into fierce energy is coming from?
I think I'm a little just if I'm being honest, I'm a little frazzled at the moment.
Mm,
Just yeah, having a lot of projects on my plate and feeling
mm,
like I have to contain it into the soft kitten, but I feel like
mm,
fire dragon right now.
mm. Well, I invite both Soft Kitten and Fire Dragon to be
Thank
present
you.
with us. Yes,
Let's do it.
all is welcome here. And yeah, I'll describe my drag avatar. And what's coming up is something that is supporting the kitten and ready for the fire.
Oh,
Yeah. So it's this, this lovely sort of housewife avatar that happens to also be a warrior princess. So
ooh,
she, her reveal would be she's, wearing sort of a subdued but comfortable, chic, beige inspired outfit that is then revealed into this fierce dragon slayer. So she's
I
able to
love
be
it.
with both.
I love the duality that we're holding.
Yes,
Yeah,
me too.
yeah, so
Beautiful.
good.
So I am really inspired by your work and I'd love to hear more about your story and for you to have an opportunity to share a little about your story with our guests. Your story towards this work connecting the divine with intimacy and your story of, becoming a sex coach and becoming a sacred intimate.
Yeah. So I've had a lot of jobs in my life. I worked for corporate for 15 years. I worked for Yahoo, and then I worked for a company called Maker Studios that got acquired by Disney. And then I worked for a Chinese startup company for a little bit. And during that time, I was also a lead singer in a band
Hmm,
always. So I was
cool.
a singer for 15 years, and really that was sort of my driver, my passion.
Hmm.
And I really wanted to become Beyonce, if I'm being honest.
Work.
it just it didn't happen, so I became a sex coach instead.
It was a
um
pop band or what type of band was it?
we were in two bands. One was called The Library, and then one was called Mirror Talk, and it was sort of like synth pop with a little R&B infused.
Hmm.
It was good. It
Cool.
was good music, and I did it till I was about 37, and it just got to a point where I lost some joy in it. I
Mhm.
really have been singing since I was like 5,
Wow.
and loved performing, loved recording. And the music industry kind of wore me down, and I just lost like my connection to the joyfulness of it. And
Mhm.
um, my 30s were definitely an exploration in my sexuality, and moving more into my holding space. I would say more of my dominance and more of being able to like hold a container, right?
Mm.
um, and I feel like sort of when I started discovering rope bondage, which is sort of how I got here. I I loved like this, like the many ways that you could play with eroticism and sexuality, and how it could bring me into what I refer to as trance states and
Mhm.
altered states of consciousness that I really felt when I was performing. Of
Mm.
sort of this like altered humanness of like I was so acutely present to what was going on that I was somewhere and something else. I was accessing a part of me that was just different. And that's how I feel when I'm in erotic space. I feel like I'm accessing something that is completely mine and completely different than who I necessarily am in my life. And it feels like an altered state of consciousness. Yeah.
Mm.
And so I thought, wow, I would like to explore this deeper and go deeper into this. And as I continue to go deeper into my own exploration, kind of processing with my own therapist of like, people connecting to me in really deep ways and not really understanding it, and kind of feeling like, well, everybody's like this, right? It's like,
Mhm.
and the recognition of like, no, everybody is not offering sort of the same things. And then kind of backing into how to teach other people how to access what I have been able to access for most of my life. Um, it's one thing to be able to say, yeah, I access these really beautiful trance states, and but then if you're not able to teach them, it's sort of like you're just bragging. um, so my exploration in studying somatic sex education and sexological body work, as well as surrogate partner therapy, and deepening my learning in BDSM and to an extent Tantra, was really trying to put language to my own experience, and then in so doing, being able to teach it, to figure out ways to teach it to people, so that they can access it for themselves.
Beautiful. And giving that gift of accessibility to this trans state that came naturally to you and wanting to share it with the world. So when you talk about that trans state, you mentioned feeling like you're connected to something larger than yourself is what I was getting. How else might you describe that trans state?
I don't know if it's connecting to something larger than myself. I think it's connecting to a piece of myself
Mm.
that is infinitely large.
Yes. Amazing. Thank you
Um,
for that distinction.
yeah, this is different, like slightly different. So
Mhm.
it's just something that's so vast. But also, like when I say to people like I'm so present in the moment, um, it's like I'm so acutely aware that I actually, my brain stops thinking and my body just takes over, and I'm sort of like, that movie with Michelle Yao. What is it called? Everywhere,
Everything,
everything,
everywhere, all at once.
all
Yeah.
at once.
Mhm.
It's sort of like that.
Mhm.
It's like
Mhm.
I'm in like multiple states of consciousness, and my arousal state is so high, and then to be able to keep myself there, and to be able to play with these arousal states that can go up and down.
Mhm.
And how I speak about it is not necessarily sexual stamina or erotic stamina, but more of like an erotic endurance of
Mhm.
like, if I'm going to play here a long time, I can't expect myself to be at a 10 the whole time. But I know how to keep myself at like an 8.5 or a 9 for a pretty long time, which it's that really like heightened state of arousal, that feels like, it almost feels so good that I don't want to come.
Mhm.
Right. And then allowing for these spaces to lull, right, to come down. If I feel like I'm getting too high, to be able to allow myself and my partners and my partnerships to create space where we're just speaking for a moment, or you know creating different types of touch or different types of play. And I think that's where people get a little lost, because they're like, I don't know what to do now, right?
Mhm.
I don't have enough tools in my tool belt to like keep this going. I know how to go from here to here,
Yeah.
but when the arc looks a little bit more like this,
Yeah.
it it takes being able to like access something different.
Yeah, beautiful. And so for those not watching, the what Court was describing was going on an upward trajectory, right? To the climax, to the point where you
Right.
come. So you start slow with some kissing or whatever that intimacy is, the foreplay, and then it builds and builds and builds, and then it comes and then it's done, right? And instead it being more like a wave. And yeah, as you were describing that, Court, is interesting thinking about your background as a musician. And it made me think of how there's musicality to that experience, right? That
Hmm.
if you watch a band, they don't start with a slow beat and then build and then that's done. It's you often have these waves and you have these different moments, these crescendos in a set. And I'm just present to how there is that parallel. And the other parallel that I'm thinking about, I'm just curious if any of this resonates, is also I often see bands. I'm a huge fan of live music. I've performed in a band, but mostly as like a tambourine player, so I don't have the same experience as you. But that experience that I've observed and witnessed and experienced on some level of a band sinking in, like
Mm-hmm.
connecting in this way that is maybe telepathic, or it's something beyond what we do on a day-to-day basis. So there's that mind melt that happens where they are connected in this way, and perhaps, yeah, connected to that bigger part of themselves, and then
Mm-hmm.
big part of each other in this unity as they co-create this experience, which often is also timeless, right? That you also kind of lose sense of time. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm curious if any of this that I'm riffing on with the musicality, the experience of a musician is resonates.
I think it absolutely does resonate. And I want to also name a big piece that we forget as we're witnessing performance
Mm,
and as we're sort of like in the erotic experience itself, which is the prep work, right?
mm,
Of, a band that is really in sync together and can connect to the audience because they're just so in sync, right? They've had a lot of practice and they just didn't stand up on that stage and learn the song and do it. It's been years of
mhm,
cultivating, as the lead person, the lead singer, cultivating a presence and a confidence to be able to stand
mhm,
in front of 10, 40, 50, 100, 25,000 people and not shrink, but
mhm,
to give the audience what they want, which is all of your bigness, right? They don't want your smallness. They don't want that. Nobody wants that. And so
mhm,
it's similar with sex. It's like nobody wants your smallness, right? They want you to show up in all of your fullness, and to be able to access that sometimes is um, is challenging for people. And so we think, oh well, I see it in the movies, and this band they perform so well. Like, why can't I have that? It's like you can, and there's like steps to get there, right? There are certain practices to be connected to your body, to allow you to connect to your genitals and your sexuality and your eroticism and your life force energy that allow you to sort of move from audience to audience
mhm,
or person to person with autonomy because that's yours. You cultivated that. And it might show up differently with different partners, or it might show up differently with different audiences, depending on the relationship present. But you leave with that. Like nobody takes that from you. And
mhm,
I think that's also a distinction with sex is a lot of people are like, well, this person, gave me the best sex of my life or gave me the best blowjob. It's like, I guess my question or inquiry would be, you know, what allowed you to do that with this
mhm,
person? Like, look at the steps. What allowed you to feel safe enough? What allowed you to create this container with this person? It just didn't happen. I promise you.
mhm,
And so when you trace that back, you can kind of back into like what I would call like portals to erotic space. Like, what are the portals that you need to be able to access this part of yourself and
mhm,
then be able to say, I really need mood. I really need smell. I really need music. I really need darkness. I really need a light filled room. I really need to know the person firsthand. I really need negotiation and consent discussions. I need to feel love. Whatever that is, knowing things about yourself allow you to have experiences that are really growthful and fruitful,
mhm.
ongoing, all the time.
Yeah, so I love this self-awareness that then moves into making requests and really setting up an intentional container that can help access that trance state. And you mentioned practice, and so I'm able to imagine what practice looks like for a band. I'm curious what that might look like for this paradigm, for this trance state in intimacy, in the eros.
I mean, everybody's going to say this, and I'm going to say it again, but self-pleasuring practice is a really valuable way if you don't have a partner to start to access the pleasure in your own hands. Like,
Mm,
what do your hands give to your body, right? And what can your body give pleasure to your hands? And just kind of like going back and forth. This exercise is called sensate focus, noticing the sensate and where your focus is and the sensation itself. And it also allows for presence to take place. And
Mm,
as we are continuing to be present in just what is and what the moment is, then our brains can start to shut down, right? We're really in such a deep place with our body and the sensations that are present, that what we're doing later, or the narrative around like what this means or who I am or what my family's doing at the moment, it just kind of falls away.
mm,
um, and so that is a practice, right? To be able to shut the mind off. It's meditative. And I work with people that are able to access meditation by sitting, by walking, and um, it is a great practice. And then it's also like, okay, what is the through line to connect this to partner engagement or
mm,
connection to your genitals and your sexuality?
mm,
Because so much of Western practices, including yoga and meditation, they just skip over the genitals like they're not there. And when we can include them and to be part of the party, we're like, you're invited to, right? It sends this message of there's importance and value there. Whereas if I'm doing a body scan meditation and I go from my belly to my pelvis to my thighs, it's like, what happened to my asshole? What happened to my genitals? Like, why aren't those being considered or mentioned or allowed? Um, and that's something to contend with in our society, is that we we think about sexuality in the hiding of our own rooms and our shadows,
mm,
and it's becoming more and more acceptable to talk about in light of day, and to
mm,
talk about the issues that we're having, and also the pleasure that we're having.
mm,
Um, it's so much easier to speak about my work through the lens of trauma and healing. It's much more acceptable to talk about it in the form of pleasure and exploration. I'm suddenly labeled something else, that's
mm,
not as kind, right? And
mm,
that's a noticing in our culture as well.
mm. Yeah, and I think there is something very queer about acknowledging, celebrating, and claiming pleasure. I think that that is
Mhm.
a gift that we bring, is the relationship that we have with pleasure. And just going back to the self-pleasure practice that you described, I really appreciate that and hope that can land as an invitation to listeners. I think that especially men, we often relate to self-pleasure simply through pornography, which in my experience is often a more dissociative experience. It's looking at something and almost experiencing the pleasure that that model might be experiencing rather than
Mhm.
going in. And I don't think that pornography is all bad. But I think the habit of only using pornography for self-pleasure can be a trap. Um, yeah, and I'll just
Yeah,
share. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and I'll share a little more.
I'm of the mindset that it's all valuable, right?
Mm,
But if you're only eating off of one item on the menu
yeah,
over and over and over and over again, it's like you're not really pushing yourself or pushing growth or pushing
yeah,
your palate. And then when you're actually out in real life, it's like you only have reference to one way of doing it, and so
yeah.
then it's hard to change that pattern. But if you're allowing yourself to porn to be a part of your masturbation practice, and then self-pleasuring practice to be an option, and then using porn with audio, or using
Mm,
it in different ways, like you start to have different choices of how to utilize and how to create space for yourself,
mm.
that can look different and all have value, right?
I love that. Yeah, I love bringing it in creatively, bringing it in new ways. Yeah, so one of my practices is a self-pleasure practice, and I often do experience it as meditation or even as prayer. And it
Mm,
is a practice I like to do in front of the mirror and to really experience my body and experience the different ways that my body can move and can experience pleasure. And yeah, I see it as a way to connect with the divine. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
yeah, I mean, when we talk about divine, I want to be really clear that sometimes when we talk about divine, there becomes like a judgment value attached to it, that
Mm.
it's better than, right? So even as we're talking about masturbation with porn as opposed to self-pleasuring practice as a meditation or divine practice, there becomes like a value proposition that one, the practice with porn is cheap
Mm.
um, and disassociative, and the other one is connected and alive. And it's sort of like, um, yeah, just take, if we could just take the value judgment away
Mm.
and notice like, what is divine for you is not going to be necessarily divine for me.
Yeah.
And also like that might change for you, your connection to divine. Like in when you're first starting out, divinity might look like your practice with porn, right? Might be
Mm.
so that moment for you might be so divine, but you don't know any better, right? We don't know what we don't know. And so being introduced to something different, we might go,
Yeah.
wow, that was really good. But actually, this is what's bringing me pleasure now, in this moment, in this body that I'm in. And it's not to say that that wasn't great. It was a stepping stone. It's
Hmm.
almost like when we're working with teachers and like some people will come work with me and they'll say, yeah, I worked with him and it was like, you're way better. And it's like, whoa, whoa,
Mm.
whoa. Actually, we need to acknowledge this teacher as someone who brought you to this moment.
Yeah.
And you don't know, you may not have been ready for what I have to offer, or coming in. And at some point, my hope for you is that you will also outgrow me and there will be
Mm.
some other teacher that brings you something new. And to acknowledge that it's cumulative, right? And that all will come together. And
Mm.
so honoring all the things that have brought us to this moment in time, I feel like is part of recognizing the divine for yourself in this specific moment.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you. And it occurs to me that you are a champion of accessibility and to
Yeah.
support folks to know that there are steps and that
Yeah.
all of it is part of the process. That we don't need to jump to this, intense, sacred, divine, this expectation or assumption that it needs to be so grandiose that, we get to move and do what is true for ourselves, and that our path really and our process really is just coming back to that truth, and it's going to be
Yeah.
different for everybody.
Absolutely.
Hmm. So I'd love to hear about your thoughts on the ways that queerness shift our relationship with spirit. So we talked about autonomous spirituality, and I'd love to hear about how you connect those things.
Yeah. So when you proposed this question to me, before we met, I was like, this is such an incredible question, because it's almost in alignment with what we were talking about, just a couple seconds ago, which is, um, you know, autonomous divinity is really like, I own this. This is
Mm.
mine. And then the queerness piece of it is similar of I don't necessarily need to ascribe to what everyone else is telling me this is supposed to be. In
Mm.
fact, um, I'm going against the grain. In all ways, everyone is telling me that I'm wrong, that my sexuality, that my personhood, in many ways is not valued, and I'm saying, actually, I don't believe you. I I am beating to the beat of my own drum. And I
Mhm.
know this to be true in myself. And so those feel inherently linked. I think, just kind of going back to this judgment value of like queerness can also be this um, sort of club, right? It's like
Mhm.
where we're like, um, we have shunned all of the traditional things and like we're in this club of our own. And I think, just this thought that I'm in right now, especially as we are in Pride Month. It is June as we're speaking, and I don't know when this will air.
Mm.
Um, but there's so many different movements happening. There's the Stop Asian Hate movement, there's the BLM movement, there's the queer movement, the women's movement happening, and even there's a small men's cis het men's movement that's sort of bubbling up.
Mm.
And it's sort of like it's wonderful that everyone has their own space to be alive and be with their own communities. But if we never take the time, and I'll speak for queer people in this moment, if we never take the time to look at our own internalized homophobia,
Mm,
if we never take the time and consideration to look at our relationship with straight men and
mm,
our relationship to straight women and misogyny for that matter, and we don't look at what our relationship to racism, including Black men and Asian men, um, we're just sort of like staying in our bubble. And really, that's not what queerness is, right? Queerness is a shine that is socially acceptable, but it's also an expression of acceptance of what is in different people.
mm,
And so I feel like if we're going to make any sort of progression, these movements have to find some sort of cohesiveness together if we're going to move forward as um, a collective group of humans, right?
mm,
Because what I know from working with queer men is we're a microcosm of the world. And
mhm,
there is all these things. There is misogyny present. There is racism present. And there is internalized homophobia. And um, there is healing that needs to be had with straight men. And that takes work, right? And repair. And we're sort of in this space of cancel culture right now.
mm,
And at some point, we're going to need to figure out how to come to a space of repair.
mm. What do you think that work is? And perhaps you could speak to it from the context of erotic and intimacy work that you do, or perhaps it's something else. But what do you think that work is to bring more connection, more acceptance, more cohesiveness and collaboration between outcast groups?
Ooh, this is a really big question. I think, as a leader in queer men's spaces, I think what is likely the most valuable work that needs to be had is with cis het white men.
Mm,
Um, and it will involve some really strong leaders coming to the forefront to hold impeccable space
mm,
for this group of humans. Um, because as it happens in the world, those are the people that hold much of the control.
mhm,
And the rest of the world is sort of like, we're ready for you to shift.
mm,
We're ready for you to change. And so we're kind of in this unique time of and women are like really powerful in this way right now. They're like, we're actually done.
mm,
We'd just rather be single
mm,
or
mhm.
or be with women or be
Yeah.
with queer men. But we're
Yeah.
just done with you. We're done with your bullshit. We're done with being your mothers. We're done with babying you, and you figure it out. And
Mm,
it's been centuries of sort of this accumulation of privilege in their bodies. And, even in my own body, I'll speak to that. And just of like putting some of that down to be able to see the harm and the damage that lives inside our actions and in our own language, right?
mm,
Um, and there's just a lot of work that has to be done to retool that. And currently, there's not a lot of space for men, and speak about men because that's sort of my jam.
mhm,
There's not a lot of space for men to gather in ritual space,
mm,
um, to create healing, to cry, to dance, to fight, to be held accountable, to be sad, to speak about the shadow of the feminine,
mm,
to speak about women, to learn, to learn how to connect to their bodies, to dance, to be in nature in a way that's like heart opening and vulnerable.
mhm,
There's not a lot of spaces for that, and it's necessary. And it's one of the reasons I love working with groups so much is because when we can create a cumulative space for men to like drop the guard,
mm,
real conversations can happen, and you start to, as a participant, you start to understand, wow, my words have meaning and impact, and
mm,
they're not as kind or as funny as I thought they were.
mm,
And my presence is different than I thought it was as
Mm.
I'm seeing it reflected back. So there's a lot of power in group work.
Mm. Yeah, and it circles me back to this piece around truth, is supporting people to really understand the truth of who they are, the truth of the impact that they're currently making, so they can perhaps see what they want instead, and to be on that healing path to create the possibility of more harmony amongst all people.
Yeah, and um, truth is sort of tricky because we are taught and conditioned out of our truth,
Hmm.
and it's hard. Let's say it's a practice
Hmm.
to be able to decipher your actual truth. Like
Yeah.
what is actually, like, what are you attuned to with your truth, and what is a story that was given to you?
Yeah.
And that's a deep question for every individual to ask of, is this a narrative that's mine, or is it something that I learned and adopted?
Hmm.
And if it's not mine, then what is mine?
Hmm.
And that's an exploration in many different facets, not
Hmm.
just sexuality.
Mm. Yeah, and there are so many modalities that can support folks to investigate that, to go inside,
Hmm.
to start letting go of the things that are not true to them and heal the things that are holding them from connecting with that truth. And so I know that you've got some of that work coming up, and that you know, are a champion again for access to the trance state. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about the ways that you support people in that, and particularly what you've got coming up soon.
Yeah, so I am. First of all, I'm launching an online community and coursework. I'm launching one of 3 modules this month, and I'm really excited about it. It's something I've been working on for a year. I'll release module 2 and 3 by the end of this year. Um, I really wanted to create a community where my clients and also other people that really don't have access to me in person, or can't fly, or can't afford it or whatever, have access to a beginnings, and for my clients that I work with, a place to go afterwards, to stay in community, to stay in places that they can continue to integrate. And so I've put a lot of time and energy into creating this space, and it will be iterative. I'm fully surrendering to
Mm,
what it is and how it will be received. I feel nervous and excited at the same time.
mm,
So that is coming out. I'm launching it with a company called Guideness, which is a platform for guides.
cool.
Um, and I also have a retreat coming up in September that's sold out, but I announced another one that will be in February,
Nice.
around sacred sexuality,
Mm,
in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico.
mm,
And then in September, I'll announce my 2024 calendar lineup of workshops and retreats that will be happening all over the country and the world. Um, and lastly, I'm going to be teaching a small workshop at a festival called Prism Fest,
mm,
which is in Cuyama. It's just like an hour and a half, 2 hours outside of LA. It's in this glamping space, which looks really beautiful. And the intention for the creators is to create a really fun celebration of queerness, just celebrating queer joy. And so I'll be there. There's a breathwork facilitator. There's DJs. There's going to be a caftan pool party, vegetarian meals served. So I'm excited. It's the first one. Again, like, these things are iterative, and so there always has to be a first one,
mhm.
and a first time. And so I think, in the true spirit of Tantra, like, this is a experiment.
Yes. Yeah, I'm in
Yeah.
touch with the producers of that event, and
Oh,
planning to be
cool.
there as well and participate in some way with some offering.
Nice.
Yeah, but so I'm excited to meet you in person there. And
Beautiful.
yeah, and grateful for this time together. Are there any final words you want to leave the listeners with? Any pieces of wisdom you want to drop?
Hmm. I would say, just like, wherever you are in your journey, on your path, that you're exactly where you're supposed to be.
Mm,
I will tell you that there is more for you. There is always possibility ahead. And so keeping that in mind, that you may not know what it is, but if you feel that there's something there, I promise you it's real. So keep listening.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Mm.